Many organizations at the moment are struggling. You have members and you wonder what happens in the situation, not only with COVID, but what happens with your association in a digital world. How do you run your events and all that? We have an international expert with us here today, certified association executive and international speaker. Hello and welcome, Ed Rigsbee.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and I'm going straight into it. The reason why I invited you is because I received a rising number of emails where people said, I'm running some sort of club, organization, or an association. And since we had the lockdown, we cannot run the events we usually do. We try to do it with some sort of online meeting, but it works-ish. It doesn't really work. What, in your opinion, because some associations obviously do very well with it and some associations do not do well with it. What, in your opinion, is what the good associations do right, and what is it that the bad associations do wrong?
Sure. Niels, you know what I've observed? It's really two things. It's member engagement and member return on investment. So, and they coalesce. And I guess if you want a third one, it's community. So the associations that create a community network, create a feeling of community for its members, tend to have higher member engagement because they're part of this community. Then that leads into a higher level of return on investment as far as the members perceive. And so it's kind of like the charity that I run during this this COVID time. I've been doing a weekly Zoom call. You know, there's no charge for it or anything. People can jump onto it, and it's just to help people keep involved in the community. Well, by having that feeling of community, they're naturally more engaged, and their perception is, hey, it's worth being part of this organization. So to answer your question more succinctly, depending on what kind of organization. Now, if we're talking a national, trade association or a national professional society, that's one perspective. If we're talking a local club or a local chapter, that's a different perspective. So,
Ed, can you hear me? I think you just cut off.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But now you're back. So local club, that's the last thing I heard. Just go from there.
Yeah. So I belong to the National Speakers Association, the Los Angeles chapter, and for me, community is going and pressing flesh, shaking hands. The content is not that important to me. Well, as they've moved to Zoom meetings, which they've actually made free for members, I'm not that interested because the Zoom meeting for the content is really not what I want. I want to be able to see members. So that becomes a challenge. And so looking at if you've got a small regional local thing, even in the COVID, you can be creating small fireside chats, which is more valuable than the meeting. So you've got maybe, I'm just going to pick a number, maybe 10 people, maybe less, on a Zoom call, on a fireside chat, talking about a particular subject. You do it in the evening, and it gets very engaging, rather than, but you only do it for an hour, maybe an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Versus, trying to do a Saturday meeting for 2/3 of a day. So I think what the organizations are doing that are keeping their members engaged, they're not just saying, okay, we're going to do basically what we used to do, and we're going to do it virtually. They're saying, wait a minute, let's stop, let's reimagine, let's think about how could it be different? How are people's lives, and especially with people being home right now, trying to, homeschool their kids, not so much childcare, it's creating some real challenges for people. And so, yeah. So how do we revisualize, re-envision this thing? And I think what we have to do is make the interactions shorter periods of time and make them more value driven. And number one, value to increase community. Number two, make them value in the kinds of conversations that people have. That's what I'm seeing that seems to be very, very successful.
So when I look into the emails I received, and certain associations emailed me and said what they do now, they do virtual events. But you now said there are a couple of events you heard about or you were part of, and they were free for members. These associations charge extra because they said virtual events are not part of your membership. So that is an error, in your opinion, to charge extra for these meetings.
It's interesting what a lot of American associations that I'm in contact with and I'm working with, what they've told me is they've upped their, and I'm just going to call them webinars, whether you want to call it online training, whether you want to call it a virtual event. That's just for, to make it simple, let's call it a webinar. Yeah. What a good number of them have done, have upped the webinars, given them to their members free, charging non-members a substantial, maybe $50, maybe $100, whatever. But the perception in the member's mind is, oh, okay, non-members are paying, let's just say $99. I'm getting this for free. I'm getting one every month during the pandemic. Heck, that's $1,200 I got for my $300 membership. Well, that's a good return on your investment, even if you didn't use any of the other features of membership. So I think that if an organization is penny wise and dollar foolish, then that's going to hurt them. And what is the key for creating value in the marketplace today? And it's always been the key, but more accurate now. What does your organization have that costs you very little to produce or give to your members that your members perceive as high value? So if you can produce a webinar and let's just say use Zoom, it's next to nothing as far as cost. You have experts within your own association as guests or instructors. It's costing you almost nothing to produce, and you give it to your members for free, and charge non-members, a reasonable price. Then the perception is, wow, this is a lot of value that the association or society is delivering to me. And I think that people need to keep that in mind. The other thing that I think a lot of associations get off the tracks is you've got to look at whether you're a trade association, a professional society, a local club. You've got to be member ROI centric. And what that means is in every aspect of your organization, whether it's the finance department, or silo, whether it's the marketing, whether it's the communications, whether it's the education, whether it's the meetings, on and on and on. How does this affect the member value? The reason for members to retain membership, how does it affect our ability to recruit members? And that needs to be one of the decision filters that is made. So everywhere in the organization, how does this affect our members' perception of value? And too frequently, people get kind of on their high horse or high road. Oh, members should be paying more for this. Members should be paying more for that. And they forget about the member value proposition. And in this COVID time, this needs to be looked at even more closely under the microscope than ever before. Yeah. And the associations that are doing that are doing quite well.
I remember you also wrote a book about that. It's called The ROI of Membership, as far as I remember, because I read it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Of course, now I have one more question to wrap this interview up, because you have contacts to so many associations. Many associations struggled this year because they, for the first time ever, had to do their annual meeting, which normally is a very important social event. They had to do their annual meeting virtually. Some did very, very well, others not so much. And I know that you visited quite a number of these meetings. What, in your opinion, because maybe we have to do it next year again. Let's hope things will change, but it's always better to be prepared than being sorry afterwards. So what, in your opinion, makes a good association conference meeting, maybe when it's even for more than one day or a longer event? What, in your opinion, makes a good virtual meeting?
A good virtual meeting, let me just go back to, I run an association CEO group that gets together every Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And they're talking, they've been doing lots of discussions about these meetings. As a matter of fact, right now on my YouTube show, Raw and Unedited for Association Executives, there are two pretty substantial interviews on how association executives converted their meeting. And I've got an interview planned for next week for a third that'll be up. So what these people are doing that seems to be very successful is they're saying, okay, let me understand what matters to my members, what creates value, and let me figure out how I'm going to make that happen virtually. So as an example, one association meeting, the executive director, because their people like to do a lot of community chumming around, so forth and so on. What she did was she put together a member packet that as soon as, I think maybe for the first 1,000 that registered, she sent this member box, not packet, but box to them. And one of the things that was in it was a drink mix. I don't know whether it was a Mai Tai or whatever it was. Yeah. And all people had to do was add the hard liquor. Well, because they were going to be doing a toast together at the end of the conference is something they always do. And as an example, she said, we always had pashminas hanging in the membership or in the organization booth because the meetings are cold a lot of times. And she mailed pashminas out to everybody. Now she got some sponsors to pay for all of this naturally. But so some of the things that are the physical elements of the meeting that people expect, she mailed it to them. And yeah, it cost a couple bucks, but it made sense. So they were maintaining some of the physicality that they enjoyed in the meeting. Now, as far as the virtual part, yeah, they worked hard on picking the right platform. There's a number of platforms out there. Some are really good and some aren't so good. And, one that I've heard that's pretty darn good is Pathable. It's very expensive. But the challenge a lot of associations are dealing with right now, the better platforms, by the time associations were moving to book an online conference, the better platforms were already booked out. Yeah, they didn't have the capacity. So unfortunately, some associations had to choose lesser ones that weren't as good. But it's taking the elements and dissecting the elements of the meeting, not just saying we're going to take our meeting and slap it online, but having the understanding, who is my member? Who is my customer base? What matters to them? How do they interact? How do we make adjustments to fulfill that need for value so they can still engage with their fellow members, but do it in a way that makes sense? And what my experience has been, some of the associations that are doing this well, even March, April, they were able to double and triple their attendance versus the live meeting. And they cut the cost, basically, most of them cut the cost at least in half. Yeah. And so those are the things that they were doing to really make the meetings happen. And going forward, I mean, most of the information I'm getting from the CEOs that I'm working with is they're not planning live meetings in the first and second quarter of 2021. And so if you're in a situation where you're wondering, oh my God, I hope in February we're going to be able to have a live meeting, you probably aren't. And so being smart about planning it. And let's face it, there's a lot of challenges meeting planners are dealing with, because the hotels and the convention centers, they've had to cut back on their staff. They're not working on hotel and convention center contracts until 3 months out. So if you're 5 months out, they're not even working with you right now. So it's creating some challenges. But the people that are really the rock stars in making this transition, it's almost a all hands on board for staff to promote, to convert, and to deliver. And I think that it's a lot of work, but it's a number of these organizations are making it happen.
Excellent. That is, of course, great advice. And I have one very last question. I know I promised you that was my last question, but with all the advice, I know, Ed, I now know you for years, and I'm traveling across half the planet normally every year to visit your charity. And we always have a great time, and you're doing a lot of good things for charity. And just one question I have. You can say no if you don't want to, but as many people will now wonder, are there more resources? Is there anything you would be willing, because of course I put your email address in the show notes of this podcast so people can contact you, but do you have anything which you could offer for free to our listeners?
Yeah. I mean, there's three things.
You can't really say no when I ask like that in a public podcast, right?
No, I've got three. Got three. Okay, let me back up.
Yeah.
This is all available through my website, rigsbee.com, RIGSBEE, like Riggs and a bumblebee. Yeah. So they're all available at rigsbee.com. Number one, you can go to my article bank at my website, and there is a subcategory of association growth articles. There's about 60 of them adapted from my book, The ROI of Membership. You can access those. You do not even have to put your email in. That's number one.
Excellent.
Number two, I mentioned there is my YouTube show, Raw and Unedited for Association Executives. You can also access that through that article bank. One of the subcategories is the show, or you can go on YouTube and just search Raw and Unedited for Association Executives. There's quite a number of shows. That's number two. Number three is I've put up online workshops complimentary for association executives. So if you go to my website, just click on the association growth in the navigation. One of the sub pull down menus is complimentary online workshops. And these run every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. There's one on copywriting to write good benefit copy. There's one on called Member ROI Simplified. And there's one that tells people how to build a brochure for recruiting members using the ROI numbers. And those, the Monday workshop runs every Monday, the Wednesday runs every Wednesday, the third Friday every Friday. Yeah. And just register and you get to see it. And if you can't see it when it runs, register, and after it runs, you'll get an email with a link for to watch later. So that's all stuff that costs nothing, that's complimentary. And I think that, or I believe that would create a reasonable amount of value for your listeners.
That is perfect. Yes, so I'm going to put all this into the show notes of this podcast. So you have a lot of things you can now read and listen to, and of course, visit and take the workshop. I can only highly recommend working with that because I already did it for years and it's excellent value. So the only thing I have left to say at the end of this podcast is, Ed, thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be part of your broadcast. And, anytime you want to do it again, just let me know.